Hi, in this lecture you will learn how to pass parameters with name notations and mix notations, and we will learn how to use the default option in parameters. If you know some other languages, you have the chance to call the methods or procedures with or without parameters. I mean, you can call the procedure without a parameter even if it has some parameters. In PLSQL, we can do that too. Sometimes the parameter is not so important for you. You just want to call the procedure, or you may want to omit some of the parameters. You can do that in PLSQL too, but notice that you can do that for only the in mod of the parameters. Doing that for out or in-out mods will cause a compilation error. To be able to call a procedure with eliminating a parameter, the parameter must have a default value. If you leave the parameter empty on the procedure call, its value will be considered as default value of that parameter. But notice that null value will be considered as a value. I mean, if you write null for the value of the procedure, its value will be null instead of the default value. Do not forget that. Alright, to specify a default value for a parameter, you write default keyword and the value or expression right after the type of the parameter. Be aware that the default value must be of the same type with the parameter type. Expression means a calculation or something that results a value with the type of the parameter. By the way, you can write column equal instead of default keyword to specify a default value for the parameter. It will be the same. Great. Now let's make an example about how we use default value within a procedure. Now, we know that this is our previous print procedure. It takes one parameter with the in mod. So let's add a default value for that parameter. I simply write default and our value. Let's say this is the print procedure. Great. I simply write default keyword, and since the type is varchar2, I wrote a string for that. Now let's compile it. As we can see, it compiled successfully. Now let's call this procedure with and without parameters. I simply write exec and print, and inside of parentheses I write hello, for example. We know that we can run a procedure with using execute command. We can use the exact short name instead of the execute. It has the same functionality. So let's run that. As we can see, it printed hello. We could use that with a parameter. So let's delete the parameter then. I delete all the things and leave it empty. Now let's run it. As we can see, it printed the default text that we have assigned in the procedure declaration. So we could call the same procedure with different number of parameters. But let me show you what will happen when you pass null as parameter. I simply write null as a parameter and run it. As we can see, it did not print anything because null is considered as a parameter. So do not confuse about that. Null means nothing, but considered as a value anyway. So the default parameter is not printed on the screen. It printed null, and null has no value, so nothing on the screen. Great. What if we have two or more parameters? How will we leave the first or second parameter empty? So now let's create another procedure and see if we can do that. Assume that we have a procedure adding new jobs into the jobs table. Let's create a procedure like that. But first, let's check the columns of our jobs table. Select all the columns from jobs. As we can see, we have 4 columns: job ID, job title, mean salary, and max salary. We have to insert values for the job ID and job title columns, but we don't have to insert any values for mean salary and max salary columns. So they can have default null value or default 0 value or something like that. With adding default values for these parameters, we will be able to call our function with only 2 or 3 parameters. We can omit the ones which has a default value. Great. Now let's declare our procedure then. Let's open up a new worksheet and write create or replace procedure add job and our parameters job ID, it is varchar2, and job title, it's varchar2 again, and mean salary, its number, and default value is 1000 for example, and max salary, its number again, and its default value is, let's say, null, and our is keyword. Now our begin and end keywords, and between them our insert clause, insert into jobs values, and our job ID and job title and mean salary and max salary. These are these parameters, not the column names. Do not confuse about that. So let's print something. I use my print procedure, and let's say the job and our job title and is inserted. Now let's run it. Great, we could create our procedure. Now let's call it with the parameters. First, let's write values for all the parameters. So I write exec and add job and our parameters. The first one is IT directive, for example, and the job title is IT director, and the mean salary is 5,000, and the maximum salary is 20,000, for example. Now let's run it. The job IT director is inserted. Let's check it then. As we can see, it is in our table now. Now let's delete one of the parameters and run our procedure again. Let's say IT director 2, and let's delete the maximum salary and run it. As we can see, it worked. We did not write the maximum salary since we know that max salary is the last parameter of the procedure and it has a default value. Let's check what is inserted as the maximum salary then. It inserted null since we assigned null as a default value for this parameter. So let's delete the mean salary too then. And run our code. Before running, let's change it to IT director 3 and run our code. And check that from the table. See that? 1000, because we set 1000 as a default value for this parameter. So now let's delete the second parameter too then. I delete the second parameter and write 4 for the job ID and run it. As we can see, we had an error because this parameter has no default value. So we have to write that parameter value to be able to run that code. But we don't have to pass any value for the parameters which have a default value. So let's press Ctrl Z for a couple times to get the first code. Now, here's the thing. How did we eliminate the parameters? We simply write nothing for that. We deleted the fourth parameter to eliminate the maximum salary. Then we deleted the third value to eliminate the minimum salary. So how did it understand that which value will be assigned for which parameter? It is by the position of the parameters. We can see from here that the first value will be assigned to the job ID, second one to job title, and goes on like that. So if we write three parameters on the call of the procedure, they will be assigned into job ID, job title, and mean salary by default. Now here is the problem. What if I want to eliminate the minimum salary and pass a parameter to the maximum salary? How will we do that? If we write three parameters, the third one will be assigned to the minimum salary. But I want to leave that empty and pass the value to the maximum salary. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that with the named notations. Name notations allow us to pass the parameters independent from the parameter position. I mean, with using a name notation, I can pass a value to a parameter in any position of a procedure call. In our previous example, we can pass a value to max salary parameter maybe in the first order of our call. If we use name notations and position together, it will be called as mixed notation. As we can see in the schema, we write our parameter name, and after that we write an equal sign and a greater than sign. Then we write our value or expression. This is called as named notation. We pass parameters to our procedure independent from the position of our parameter. We don't have to run our procedure with the execute command. We can run it within a begin end block too. No difference. By the way, the parameter name must be exactly the same as the name in the procedure declaration. So let's see how to use that in our example. Now let's update our code then. IT Director 5, and in here I delete these and write max salary and equal and greater than signs, and let's say 10,000, and run it. See that? Pretty simple. I write max salary because max salary is the name of the parameter, then equal and greater than signs, then the value that I want to assign. Now, since this has both positional and name notations, this type is called as mixed notations. We know that the first two values are considered as positional. So now let's try to pass a parameter to the minimum salary, but at the first position. So I write mean salary and equal and greater than signs and write 500 for example. Now let's run it. Before running, let's change this to 6 and run our code. We have a problem here. We got an error and it says a positional parameter association may not follow a name association. Means you cannot write a positional notation after the name notation. Since we write mean salary name notation before the job ID parameter, we got an error. But we have to write these two positional parameter values. So I need to write mean salary after these notations. So let's cut that from here and paste it to the end. Notice that we write mean salary and max salary in different positions, because we know that mean salary is written before the max salary in the procedure declaration. So now let's run it and see if it works. As we can see, we could succeed. We can use named notations for any of our parameters, and the position is not important. To see that better, let's use name notations for all our parameters. Let's write job ID, IT Director, and let's cut that from here and paste into here. And change this with IT Director 7. And in here I write job title and run our code. As we can see, no problem. But first, let's check if we could do that correctly. It works successfully. And this is called as name notation since there is no positional assignment. Now, there are some important things that you should know about that subject. Let's say, if you pass the first parameter with the name notation, you cannot pass parameters with its position. If the first thing that you have written in your procedure call is done with the name notation, the rest must all be with the name notation. But you can write any number of positional assignments until you use the first named notation. The second one is, you can use named notations both for in and out mod parameters. The mod is not important here. But if you will do that for the out or in-out mods, you need to write a variable instead of a value. Actually, you must do that for both named and positional notations. Alright, now we know how to use the default option, and we saw that we can omit some parameters if they have a default value. Besides, we have learned how to use positional, named, and mixed notations. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lectures.